Crack the whip, okay? All right, friends, so you'll see that the heading for this, Herzl as a European Jew and a Zionist. That first bullet point, Herzl believed that modern developments in Europe were positive for all citizens. He was a real modernist. He loved European culture. He thought it was positive for Jews as well as anybody else. A second bullet point, things like the Dreyfus case and other things, the pogroms against Jews in Russia and so forth, he found his hopes of full acceptance shaken. I'm talking about Herzl. Not everybody believes that this was Herzl. He was shaken by that. And he concluded that the best answer for the flourishing of Jews was an independent political status. That's his conclusion. A place where Jews could organize themselves in their own, sometimes the term is commonwealth or homeland. Sometimes they will even use the term state. He would use that term. And it might be in either Argentina or Palestine. Those were two places that he was in particularly early on in favor of discussing. Think about Argentina for a moment. You know, it's a massive state, lots of open area 100 years, 120 years ago that could be developed. And the thought was, why not that as a homeland? It was a serious discussion, is the point. Excuse me. In 1896, early in the year, he published a pamphlet. It was in German, and it was entitled "The Jewish State." He proposed that Jews establish financial and political institutions. I'm going to say this carefully. That they establish financial and political institutions to cooperate with European powers in forming a Jewish state. Next bullet point. Herzl was not politically known or connected. He was an idea man. Very bright, very verbal, intense in his relationships. So his piece and other writings did not get much initial traction, but was widely discussed among his Jewish compatriots. He was indefatigable. He just worked, he literally worked himself to death at age 44. He never turned down a speaking engagement. He had a calendar full of appointments to raise money and influence and support, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He was a whirlwind until his death in 1904. And he wanted to make a Jewish national home a recognized answer to, quote, the Jewish question. So here's an example of the book there on your left-hand side as you look at it in German. Should you be interested, there are plenty of examples of his writings translated into English. Here's a good collection of it right there on the right. There's a picture of him as an adult there. But what I wanted you to see, and you'll have to trust me because it's in small print, turn my back to you. If you're looking right down here and right here, the subtitle is a solution to the Jewish question. That's the subtitle of the word, a solution to the Jewish question, a Jewish state. All right, here's the family of Herzl. In 1889, remember he was born in 1860. In 1889, he married Julia Naschauer, and she was from a well-to-do Jewish family, even more well-to-do than his family. Now, I got to say, friends, I love this picture. If I had a hat with a feather like that, I'm serious. You know, he's got the silk and the lace and so forth. I love it. I'm sorry. I love the picture. It was not a happy union. I hate to say that. Herzl was fully consumed with his ideas, always on the go, spending the family resources, etc., etc. By all accounts, she was not as interested, imagine that. She was not consumed the way he was with political dreams. She resented his time away from home and their 3 children, Paulina, Hans, and Margarita. Paulina is named for Theodor's sister. Remember, he had an older sister who was 1 year older who had died of typhus. Briefly, his children had tragic stories. Paulina died of a drug overdose as an adult. The son, Hans, took his own life. He was distraught over a number of things, including the death of his sister. And the Nazis executed the 3rd daughter in a concentration camp. That's a sad thing to report. Here's a picture of him with his daughters right there. So, note the title here, friends, Herzl's Zionism in the late 19th century. His proposal was a political proposal. That needs to be emphasized. It assumed that Jews comprised a single people. They could develop national institutions. Think about that, national institutions to secure a homeland. You may not know this about Herzl, but many Zionists, Herzl himself included, were not traditionally religious. This was not a religious movement for Theodor Herzl. It was a political and a cultural movement for him. Of course, many Zionists were religious, want to see this as a fulfillment of their faith, but that was not the case for Herzl himself. Herzl was very proud of his European heritage. He just felt like he was unable to fully express it in the current climate, and he despaired of any changes in his own lifetime. So what he wanted was to escape the scourge of antisemitism and to grasp his own and their own identity. That 3rd bullet point, keeping religious and secular Zionists together in a common movement has been a commitment and a difficulty from the beginning. All you have to do is kind of nod your head. You can imagine that, right? Look at any kind of discussion today. What are the values that underpin it? So you're under a big tent, but you got person A over here with person B over here. How to keep the religious Zionism and the political Zionism together was a very difficult task. So small groups of European Jews began to immigrate to Palestine in the last quarter of the 19th century. Part of that was the fact that by this time the Ottoman Empire was in pretty significant decline. It was also broke. And when you're in decline and broke, then, well, fill in the blank. There's certain things you might allow that you might not otherwise and had not done previously. Palestine, and that's the term that everybody used. Jews, Arabs, Europeans, everybody used that term for the area now, which is essentially the modern state of Israel and parts of Lebanon, Jordan, and so forth. But Palestine was a backwater, sparsely settled region of the Ottoman Empire. In 1890, excuse me, friends, sorry. In 1890, about 4% of the population of Palestine was Jewish. It was small. By 1914, in the outbreak of World War I, Jews were 15% of the population. That'll give you some idea of the uptick in immigration that political circumstances had fostered from the previous centuries. Now, second bullet point, most Jews bought property or settled in deserted areas. The Ottoman law said, we're happy for Jews to come anywhere, but not Palestine. It was against the law for them to buy property in Palestine because, every month a petition arrived in Istanbul, please open up Palestine for the Jews. It was all the time. Well, Palestine was a backwater. The local officials there were, how shall I say it, open to persuasion. So immigration took place. So they established some small communities, small-scale manufacturing, agricultural settlements, and so forth. And because they lived so closely together, they developed common forms of community. You will know the term the kibbutz or the moshav. They have everything in common. Well, that was partly due to the way they settled there, also to their idealism. Tel Aviv, which until a few years ago was the largest Jewish city in Israel, was founded in 1900. There's a city from centuries long. You'll recognize it as Jaffa in the New Testament. Well, it was a nice coastal city. In 1900, it had some sand dunes on the north side, and that's where some immigrants developed. And now, of course, they've got a million-plus people who live in Tel Aviv. All right, here's a little pie chart, which I hope will visual learners like myself. You'll see the headline there, Population of Palestine in the late 1800s. So the little blue right here is the 4%, okay? And the 86% would be Muslim Palestinians. 10% would be Christian Palestinians. About 500,000 people, that's an estimate, about 500,000 people there in 1890. All right, everybody got the setting? So this is what Palestine was like when Herzl writes his pamphlet, The Jewish State. Okay, one picture I thought you'd like to see, pull it off of the internet, early Jewish immigrants about 1890. Got the little tents in the background there. You see all the hoes right here. If you're going to eat, you got to work, right? So you can see that's, shall I put it this way, starting from the beginning? All right, so Herzl sent a proposal through a German representative to Abdul Hamid II. He was the Sultan or the Caliph, the head of the Ottoman Empire, even in its decline, 1896. And that first bullet point says something like this, that Jewish immigrants would make big investments in Palestine, and that the region would then flourish if he would grant Jews some self-governing rights there. Herzl also proposed that Jews across the world would contribute enough money to pay off the debt of the empire. That at least gets your attention. The Sultan was opposed to this. I'll show you his quote in a moment. He actually met Herzl a couple years later. When Herzl was traveling there later, you can't see it very well. This is a postcard that he sent to his daughter Paulina, 1898 there on the right-hand side. Okay, there's Abdul Hamid on the left and Herzl on the right. All right, here's his reply in 1896. It's worth us all reading it, friends. Tell Dr. Herzl not to take any further steps in his project. Shall I just say full stop? I cannot give away a handful of the soil of this land as it is not my own. Now remember, he's the Caliph and the Sultan. What's behind his statement? It belongs to the Islamic nation who have fought for the sake of this land and watered it with their blood. Think of the Crusades. The Jews may keep their millions, If the Islamic Caliphate is one day destroyed, then they would be able to take Palestine without a price. That's an interesting statement. While I am alive, I would rather push a sword into my body than see the land of Palestine taken away from the Islamic State. This will never happen. I will not start cutting our bodies while we are alive. Now, we live in a different generation. You understand that dynamic? Just nod your head. So, why Palestine? The answer may seem obvious. It's the ancestral homeland of Jews. That answer, however, was not obvious to all European Jews who may not have had an attachment to the region. For some detractors, it was too religious an answer. For others, it was the impoverished nature of the area at the time. It was, after all, part of a Muslim state. And so it made Palestine seem unworkable for a number of people. And that second bullet point, I mentioned this, I'll come back to two or three different ways. There were, in fact, serious, and I underscore that term, friends, serious political conversations in Europe about options for a Jewish homeland in Africa, South America, and Cyprus. When I say serious, we're talking about people making proposals to the British government to assist from this, or to the United States government, or to the German Kaiser to assist with this. So here is Herzl on Palestine as the Jewish national home. I have a couple of quotes here. They're worth our time. Palestine is our unforgettable historical homeland. The very name would be a powerful rallying cry for our people. If His Majesty the Sultan were to give us Palestine, we could, in return, pledge ourselves to regulate the finances of Turkey. Money talks. Next year in Jerusalem is our age-old watchword. Now it's a matter of showing that the dream can be transformed into an idea that is as clear as day. Okay, friends, let me see how I'm doing on time. Very well, thank you. 1897. Remember, the publication of the pamphlet was early in 1896. Herzl wanted to call a Congress, get representative Jews from various places, Russia, Austrian Habsburg Empire, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, anybody else who would come. He sent out lots of invitations. He worked and worked and worked to establish this conference. He wanted to have it in Berlin. However, the powers that be in Berlin said, no thank you. We don't want to have that here. So he ended up making a good agreement with the Swiss town of Basel. And so finally, it was held in Basel, Switzerland in August of 1897. I hope it wasn't hot then as it is in Europe now. Wow. He begged people to come. He invited any and all who were interested to attend. He had money and he borrowed more to fund the event. He fussed about all of the details. So some 200 people came plus observers. Third bullet point there. It was a very European conference. One of the requests, and being a casual person, I didn't know how to respond. Formal attire was requested for a conference. I'll show you a picture in a minute. There were plenary speeches, banquets, a lot of wine, lots of invaluable networking as well. So it set a precedent. It started a momentum that was really quite amazing. So after that initial conference, there would be one held every year until 1901, and then every other year. It would spawn all kinds of things that are still in place over 100 years later, and we'll talk about some of that tomorrow. But it was just one of those seminal moments in a movement. You can hope for it, you can pray for it, etc. But you can't. It just happens. And so the Congress became the public face and the representative of Zionism. Remember, a term that was just first used in the early 1890s, but it caught on. And it is a place where Jewish organizations could network. Okay, so here's a black and white picture of them. They met in what was called the Opera House there in Basel. And it's difficult for you at this angle to see everything, but Herzl is standing right there in the middle. And you can see it's mostly men, and they got on their finery. A lot of important things happened there, including some wonderful impassioned speeches. There's one account of a newspaper reporter there saying Europeans had never seen somebody in formal attire stand on a chair and wave his handkerchief and start dancing, who was so excited by what had taken place there at the meeting. And not just what had taken place, but what it had obviously spawned and what would quickly develop. Okay, now, here is an entry in Herzl's diary after Basel. I should add, spend a little time on this. He was an inveterate writer. His diary, he had a huge diary. Many of the things in it have been translated into English. But this is what he said to himself. If I had to sum up the Basel Congress in one word, which I shall not do openly, it would be this. At Basel, I founded the Jewish state. If I were to say this today, I would be greeted by universal laughter. In 5 years, perhaps, and certainly in 50, everyone will see it. Isn't that amazing? Whatever political viewpoints you may have or I may have, that is an amazing diary entry. (1897), before World War I, before the British Mandate of Palestine, before the final solution to Nazism, before the ultimate forming of the State of Israel. At Basel, I founded the Jewish state. What are we going to talk about tomorrow? How the conferences developed. Herzl takes his one and only trip to Israel. The options of homelands that were discussed, Africa, Argentina, and Palestine, and how it was that the British government ultimately made a homeland possible. That's tomorrow. I want to thank you for coming today.